AMA saw Kawasaki's H2 and moved to erase it from history. In 1972, the AMA opened racing to full 750cc displacement for both two-stroke and four-stroke engines, expecting gentlemanly competition. Instead, Kawasaki delivered a mechanical weapon that terrorized every racetrack in America. The decision nearly destroyed professional motorcycle racing and forced regulators to rewrite the rulebook forever. Here's the real story they don't want you to know. The year 1971 should have been a celebration for motorcycle racing. After years of restrictive displacement limits that favored certain manufacturers, the AMA finally announced they were opening the floodgates for 1972. Two-strokes and four-strokes would compete on equal terms at full 750cc displacement. Think of it like this. If you've ever watched Formula 1, imagine if they suddenly removed all engine restrictions and told teams to build whatever they wanted. That's what the AMA did to motorcycle racing. It was supposed to create fair competition. Instead, it handed Kawasaki the keys to chaos. While other manufacturers were building refined touring machines disguised as racers, Kawasaki's engineers were asking a different question. What happens when you ignore every rule except win at any cost? Picture two different approaches to building a race bike. The Suzuki GT750 arrived with water cooling and a 61-inch wheelbase. That's like building a race car with a luxury sedan suspension. It was clearly designed for comfortable touring despite its racing pretensions. Its conservative 31-degree steering geometry whispered weekend rides rather than screaming racetrack domination. But Kawasaki's H2 Mach 4 left no room for misinterpretation. This wasn't a motorcycle that happened to be fast. It was a weapon that happened to have wheels. Two exhaust pipes on one side, one on the other. No symmetrical pretense like the British manufacturers used to hide their compromises. Every design choice shouted one word: function. For those new to motorcycles, here's what made this so shocking. Most bikes try to balance comfort, reliability, and speed. The H2 threw comfort and reliability out the window and focused purely on speed. It's like comparing a Swiss Army knife to a samurai sword. Both are tools, but they serve very different purposes. Racing legend Kevin Cameron, who was building his own H2R that season, watched the development with a mixture of awe and terror. My big question about this new model was, will Kawasaki offer a 750 production racer as they had with the H1R? I made Bob Hansen tired of picking up the phone. The answer would reshape American motorcycle racing forever. But before we dive into what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever owned something so powerful it scared you? Maybe a fast car, or even just a really sharp knife in the kitchen. Keep that feeling in mind, because that's exactly what happened to an entire industry. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into motorcycle history, make sure to hit that like button. We've got some incredible stories coming up about crashes, fires, and regulatory battles that changed everything. To understand why the H2 was so dangerous, you need to understand what makes a two-stroke engine different from what's in your car. Most engines work like your lungs. 4 steps: breathe in, compress, explode, breathe out. That's a 4-stroke engine. Simple, smooth, predictable. A 2-stroke engine does all of that in just 2 steps. It's like trying to breathe twice as fast while doing twice as much work. The result is more power, more noise, more smoke, and absolutely no patience for mistakes. Think of it this way. If a 4-stroke engine is like a professional boxer throwing calculated punches, a 2-stroke is like a street fighter throwing haymakers. Less finesse, more violence. The H2 748cc 2-stroke triple wasn't just big, it was engineered brutality disguised as sophistication. While 4-stroke engines required 4 separate steps to produce power, the H2's engine accomplished everything in just 2 violent strokes. More power per cubic centimeter, more power per pound, more power than anyone had calculated was possible. But here's where it gets interesting for gearheads and newcomers alike. Kawasaki's real genius was hidden in the details that racing officials didn't understand until it was too late. The engine used the same 115mm cylinder pitch as the smaller H1. That might sound boring, but it was brilliant. It kept overall width manageable despite the massive displacement. More importantly, it allowed Kawasaki to use existing tooling and production methods, making the bike affordable enough that privateer racers could actually buy them. At $1,000, an H2 cost less than most muscle cars but delivered performance that left Detroit's finest choking in 2-stroke smoke. To put that in perspective, $1,000 in 1972 is about $7,000 today. You could buy a bike that would embarrass a Corvette for less than the price of a used Honda Civic. The suspension was deliberately simple. Basic twin shocks in the rear that would flex under the massive torque loads. Racing officials saw this as a limitation. Kawasaki engineers knew it was a feature. That flex provided just enough give to prevent the chassis from snapping under forces no conventional motorcycle frame was designed to handle. It was like building a skyscraper that sways in the wind instead of fighting it. Sometimes flexibility prevents catastrophic failure. When the first H2s rolled onto racetracks in early 1972, tire manufacturers realized they had a problem. The bikes were generating so much torque that they were literally tearing racing slicks to pieces. Imagine trying to drag race with bicycle tires. That's essentially what was happening. Don Emd watched the carnage and made a brilliant tactical decision. He won the 1972 Daytona 200 on a tiny Yamaha 350 twin while the big displacement bikes destroyed their own tires. Sometimes being smaller and smarter beats being bigger and stronger. But the real shock came when riders learned to manage the H2's power delivery. The secret was understanding that this wasn't a conventional motorcycle, it was a partnership with controlled violence. Now, we know some of you are thinking, this sounds insane. Why would anyone want to ride something like this? Well, stick around because we're about to show you exactly why these bikes became legendary. And if you're finding this story as crazy as we do, go ahead and subscribe. We've got plenty more stories about machines that redefined what was possible. What happened on racetracks across America in 1972 and 1973 reads like a horror story written by physics itself. Let me paint you a picture of what it was like to watch an H2 in action. Imagine you're at a drag strip, watching two cars line up. One is a family sedan, the other looks similar but has a rocket engine hidden under the hood. When the flag drops, the rocket car doesn't just win, it makes the other car look like it's standing still. That's what the H2 did to motorcycle racing. The H2 didn't just win races, it redefined what winning looked like. Traditional racing strategies involved careful tire management, precise cornering, and calculated overtaking maneuvers. Think chess on two wheels. The H2 eliminated strategy and replaced it with raw intimidation. It turned chess into arm wrestling. Riders discovered they could simply pin the throttle on straightaways and watch competitors disappear in their mirrors. The bike's power-to-weight ratio was so extreme that it could overcome almost any disadvantage through pure acceleration. For newcomers to motorcycles, power-to-weight ratio is like horsepower per pound. It's what determines how fast something can accelerate. A modern sports bike might have 180 horsepower and weigh 400 pounds. That's 0.45 horsepower per pound. The H2 had 74 horsepower but weighed only 470 pounds. That's 0.16 horsepower per pound. Which doesn't sound impressive until you understand two-stroke power delivery. Two-stroke engines don't make power smoothly, they make it in violent bursts. So while the numbers look modest, the actual experience was like being shot out of a cannon every time you twisted the throttle. But that same power created dangers that racing officials hadn't anticipated. At Talladega in 1973, Duhamel experienced every racer's nightmare at 170 miles an hour on the banking. Something broke in the engine, oil sprayed onto the hot exhaust pipes, and his H2 became a 30-foot comet of fire. Picture this scene, a professional motorcycle racer on fire at 170 miles per hour trying to slow down enough to jump off safely while his bike continues as a rolling inferno. That's not racing, that's survival. The image of professional racers being ejected from flaming motorcycles at highway speeds was exactly what AMA officials had feared when they opened the displacement limits. But here's what really scared racing officials. The accidents were only part of the problem. The H2 was making traditional racing obsolete. Think about any sport you know well, basketball, football, tennis, whatever it might be. Now imagine someone invented a piece of equipment that made skill irrelevant. That's what the H2 did to motorcycle racing. Motorcycle racing had always been a balance of multiple skills: cornering technique, braking precision, raceline selection, and strategic thinking. The H2 reduced all of that to a single question: can you hold on when the bike tries to launch you into orbit? Hurley Wilvert proved the answer was yes when he delivered the H2's best ever Daytona 200 finish in 1974. Third place behind Giacomo Agostini and Kenny Roberts on their four-cylinder Yamahas. But that podium finish also demonstrated something troubling. It took a master-level rider working at the absolute limit to extract the H2's potential safely. For every Hurley Wilvert who could tame the beast, there were dozens of riders who couldn't. Hospital emergency rooms near major racetracks began seeing a new pattern of injuries. High-speed crashes that followed the same template as street accidents but with even more violent outcomes. The H2 was creating a two-tier racing system: riders who could handle the violence and riders who couldn't compete at all. The American Motorcyclist Association had opened Pandora's box, and by 1974 they were desperately trying to force the demons back in. The problem wasn't that the H2 was winning. Racing has always rewarded the fastest machine. The problem was that the H2 was rewriting the fundamental assumptions about what motorcycle racing could safely allow. Let me explain this in terms anyone can understand. Imagine you're running a basketball league, and someone invents a basketball player who's 15 feet tall. Sure, they're playing by the rules, but they're making the game boring for everyone else. That's what the H2 did to motorcycle racing. AMA officials were facing pressure from multiple directions. Track owners were dealing with insurance companies who saw the fire-breathing H2s as unacceptable liability risks. Tire manufacturers were complaining that their racing slicks couldn't handle the torque loads. Medical personnel at racing events were reporting injury patterns they'd never seen before. But the most damaging pressure came from within the racing community itself. Veteran riders who had spent decades mastering the art of motorcycle racing were watching their skills become irrelevant overnight. Traditional racing techniques like smooth throttle application, careful cornering lines, and strategic positioning meant nothing when a single H2 rider could simply twist the throttle and disappear. It's like spending years learning to play chess, only to have someone change the rules so the queen can move anywhere on the board instantly. Technically still chess, but not the game you spent your life mastering. Young riders were buying H2s and winning races through pure power rather than developed skill. The sport was losing its emphasis on rider development and technique. Internal AMA documents from late 1973 reveal officials were discussing displacement restrictions and power-to-weight limits specifically targeting the H2 platform. Racing engineer Pete Williams, who consulted for several manufacturers, later revealed they were scared, not of the bikes themselves, but of what racing would become if every manufacturer started building weapons instead of motorcycles. Think about that for a moment. They weren't afraid of the H2, they were afraid of what would happen if Honda, Suzuki, and Yamaha decided to build their own versions. An arms race where rider skill became secondary to engineering extremes. The final straw came when insurance companies began threatening to drop coverage for any racing organization that allowed unlimited two-stroke motorcycles. Without insurance, professional racing would simply cease to exist. Here's something most people don't know. Insurance companies don't care about excitement or tradition, they care about math. And the math on H2 racing was terrifying. Higher accident rates, more severe injuries, more expensive medical bills, more property damage. From an insurance perspective, the H2 was a financial disaster waiting to happen. By 1974, the AMA quietly began implementing technical restrictions that made the H2's design philosophy impossible to pursue. Displacement limits returned, power-to-weight ratios were capped, two-stroke engines faced additional restrictions that effectively banned them from professional competition. They never explicitly banned the H2, they just made it obsolete. It's like changing building codes so that skyscrapers can't be over 10 stories tall. You don't ban the Empire State Building, but you make sure no one can build another one. But here's where the story gets really interesting. While AMA officials were sanitizing professional racing, something unexpected was happening on America's streets. The H2 wasn't disappearing, it was evolving into something even more dangerous. Denied access to professional racetracks, H2 owners created their own racing culture. Drag strips, abandoned airfields, and empty highways became the new battlegrounds where the H2's brutal power could be unleashed without regulatory interference. Let me tell you what this looked like in practice. Picture your typical Friday night at a drag strip in 1974. Muscle cars lined up, Chevelle SS with a 454 big block, Plymouth Cuda with a 440 six-pack, maybe a Dodge Charger with a Hemi. These cars represented the pinnacle of American automotive performance. 400 plus horsepower, quarter-mile times in the high 13-second range. Then an H2 would pull up to the line. The car drivers would look at this little motorcycle and think, easy money. The bike looked tiny next to their massive American iron. No way something that small could compete with that much Detroit muscle. The light would turn green, and the motorcycle would simply disappear. The techniques for launching an H2 became street racing folklore. These weren't official techniques taught in riding schools. This was knowledge passed between riders who had figured out how to survive the H2's violent power delivery. The method to stop it from wheel standing was to lean way forward with your chin between the tach and speedometer. Get so far forward on the seat you're almost sitting on the tank. Then rev it to about 5,000, pop the clutch, and the rear wheel would break loose a bit, laying a patch as the bike launched forward. By then, the other guy was already left behind. Think about what that description reveals. To launch the bike properly, you had to adopt a riding posture that looked ridiculous. Crouched forward like you're hugging the gas tank, revving to a specific RPM, then dumping the clutch and hoping the rear tire would spin just enough to prevent a wheelie, but not so much that you lost forward momentum. This wasn't riding as most people understood it. This was mechanical warfare. For newcomers to motorcycles, let me explain why wheelies were such a problem. When a bike's front wheel comes up, you lose steering control. At a drag strip, that means you're heading straight towards whatever's at the end of the track at 100+ miles per hour with no way to steer. It's like driving a car with no steering wheel. At drag strips across America, the H2 was rewriting performance expectations. While the fastest muscle cars were running quarter miles in the high 13-second range, experienced H2 riders were posting consistent 12-second times. The bike that racing officials deemed too dangerous for professional tracks was embarrassing Detroit's finest automotive engineering. The drag racing community embraced the H2 with religious fervor. It represented everything they valued: pure performance, mechanical honesty, and complete disregard for compromise. All over America, people in shops were applying common sense and a spirit of experimentation to these inexpensive but potent bikes. Pipes, big carbs, more compression, maybe an extra clutch plate or two. It was all so easy. Here, put on this smoked off by Kawi t-shirt. Specialized tuning shops like Fast by Gas began offering complete H2 racing engines and modification packages. The bikes became the foundation for an entire underground racing economy that operated outside traditional motorsports regulation. But this street racing success also sealed the H2's fate. Every spectacular victory, every muscle car left behind in clouds of two-stroke smoke, was evidence that the AMA had been right to fear what unrestricted motorcycle development could create. Now, some of you might be thinking this sounds incredibly dangerous, and you'd be right. But before you judge these riders too harshly, remember that this was a different era. Safety gear was minimal, protective equipment was basic, and the attitude towards risk was completely different. Today's H2 has the same attitude as the 1970s bikes, but with modern technology that hides some hard truths. The modern H2 uses a supercharged engine. A supercharger forces extra air into the engine like a mechanical lung. More air means more fuel burns, creating bigger explosions and more power. The H2 makes over 200 horsepower, or in 310 plus in the track-only H2R. That's car-level power in something lighter than a golf cart. But compressing air creates a lot of heat. Modern H2s have two temperature gauges, one for engine coolant and one for supercharger temperature. When you ride hard enough, engine temperature drops but supercharger temperature climbs fast. Above 140 to 150 miles per hour for long periods, that heat can damage the bike. The fix is the same as 50 years ago. Understand what you bought and modify it. Many H2 owners spend $4,000 plus on intercooler kits. An intercooler cools compressed air before it enters the engine, giving more power and better reliability. This creates two types of owners: casual riders who treat it like any bike, and serious owners who invest in proper cooling and understand the bike's needs. The H2 forces you to decide what kind of rider you are. The AMA's response to the original H2 established precedents that still govern motorcycle racing today. Today's racing has strict rules about engine size because of what the H2 did. Racing groups still ban supercharged engines because they give too much power. The AMA didn't ban the H2 because it was unsafe. They banned it because the bike made power more important than skill. Good riders couldn't compete against bad riders on better bikes. This wasn't fair racing anymore. Both the old and new H2 tell the truth about high performance. Most bikes try to make the riders feel good about themselves. The H2 shows you exactly what you can and can't do. The old bike needed special riding skills. The new bike needs special care to keep it from overheating. Riders who do well with H2s treat them like partners, not bikes. Racing officials banned the H2, but street riders loved it. Today, good condition H2s sell for $30,000. That's 20 times what they cost new. The H2 stands for something rare, a bike built with no compromises. Most bikes try to please everyone. The H2 was built by engineers who wanted to make the fastest bike possible. Nothing else mattered. This caused problems, but also made something special. The problems weren't mistakes. In 2014, Kawasaki brought back the H2 name. They fixed the old problems with computers and better parts, but kept the same attitude. The new H2R makes 310 horsepower and weighs 485 pounds. Like the old bike, you can only ride it on racetracks. It still runs hot when you push it hard. The H2 got banned because it was too honest about what real speed costs. Both versions make owners face the truth. Getting the most from these bikes takes work, skill, and money after you buy them. The AMA learned this in 1972 when one bike almost ruined racing. Today's H2 owners learn it when they find out they need expensive cooling systems and special training to use their bikes right. This isn't a mistake. It's what happens when you care more about speed than comfort. Most products make people feel good no matter what. The H2 shows that some things take real effort to master. The question isn't if you can buy an H2, it's if you're ready to do what it takes to ride one the right way. Would you be prepared to handle that kind of mechanical honesty? More importantly, would you be ready to invest what it actually takes to unleash it safely? Let us know in the comments what you think. And if you want more stories about motorcycles that refuse to follow the rules and changed entire industries, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell.